The wind bit sharp that February morning across the Montana plains. The land stretched wide and lonely, dusted in frozen snow. Samuel Crawford stood on his porch, boots planted firm, coat collar turned up against the cold. In his hand, an old pocket watch ticked steady. 6:47. The stagecoach was late. The Crawford Ranch rose behind him. 2 stories of solid timber and silence. A house with good bones and empty rooms. For 3 long years, Samuel had lived in that silence. 3 years since Sarah died giving birth. 3 years of cooking for one, talking to horses, and forgetting what another person's voice sounded like across the breakfast table. The idea of a mail-order marriage had started as something practical. He wasn't a man for courting. He wanted company, not heartbreak. A woman needed safety. He needed someone to share the quiet. It wasn't supposed to be complicated. But as the stagecoach wheels appeared in the distance, dust rising on the frozen ground, something twisted in his chest. He straightened his coat, touched the ring in his vest pocket. Sarah's ring, the one he couldn't bring himself to bury. The coach rattled to a stop. Snow spraying over Samuel's boots. The driver leaned down, grinning with that cruel amusement men sometimes had when they thought they knew more than you. "Your package, Crawford." A woman stepped down carefully, black traveling dress brushing the snow, face hidden beneath a thick veil. She carried a small trunk and moved like someone who'd learned not to stumble when the world watched. Samuel stepped forward, rehearsed words of welcome dying in his throat. "Mr. Crawford," she said, her voice calm, almost steady. "I'm Clara Bennett." Her gloved hand rose. She lifted the veil. Samuel froze. The right side of her face was marked by deep burn scars. Skin puckered and pale, running from temple to jaw, twisting her mouth into a half-smile that wasn't really a smile at all. The left side was untouched, delicate and beautiful, framed by dark hair. The contrast was jarring, almost cruel. For a heartbeat, the world went silent except for the wind. Clara read the shock on his face instantly. People always did. Her chin lifted, shoulders squaring like a soldier on parade. "The agency didn't tell you," she said flatly. "I understand if the contract's void. I can take the next stage east." Samuel opened his mouth, but no words came. All the polite phrases he'd practiced vanished. He'd expected someone plain, maybe timid, not a woman carved by fire and still standing tall. He heard Sarah's voice in his memory. Soft but firm. "Do the right thing, Samuel. Be better than your fear. The agreement stands." He managed finally. His voice came out rough but certain. "Welcome to Crawford Ranch, Miss Bennett." A flicker of surprise crossed Clara's eyes. Then she nodded once, come again. The driver spat tobacco into the snow. "Good luck, Crawford. You'll need it." Samuel ignored him, reached for her trunk. Clara didn't thank him. She walked past him up the porch steps, her back straight, her movements careful but proud. He watched her disappear into his house, and for the first time in years, Samuel realized he'd just made a choice that might change everything. Inside, Clara stood in the middle of the kitchen, surveying the room. Torn curtains, dust on every surface, cold hearth, and a table that hadn't seen a home-cooked meal in months. She set her bag down and took off her gloves with quiet purpose. "You don't have to," Samuel began. Awkward. "Where do you keep the cleaning rags?" she asked, not looking at him. "Under the basin," he said, but she'd already found them. Her movements were efficient, like a woman used to hard work and no help. She began wiping the table, sweeping dust into her palm, her sleeves rolled to the elbows. Samuel stood there uncertain, hat in his hands. "I'll show you the bedrooms," he said finally. I'll take the maid's room," she interrupted gently, nodding toward the small one off the kitchen. "That one." "That's not right," Samuel said. "You should have the main room upstairs." Clara looked up. The lamplight caught the scars on her face, making shadows dance across her skin. "Mr. Crawford, let's be clear about terms. I'm here to work. Keep house, cook, mend. Nothing more is expected or offered. The small room is sufficient. Her words were polite, but final. Samuel wanted to argue, but he couldn't find a reason that didn't sound foolish. He stepped back, tipped his hat, and left her to her work. Dinner that night was salt, pork, and beans. Clara cooked with quiet skill, each motion careful, practiced. Samuel sat across from her, uncomfortable in his own home. "How long have you been alone here?" she asked after a long silence. 3 years. Wife died. Childbirth. I'm sorry. It was God's will, he said automatically, though he no longer believed it. Clara nodded once, eyes steady. I know what it is to lose. They ate in silence after that. The unsigned marriage license sat on the mantel like an accusation. Both saw it. Neither mentioned it. When the dishes were done, Samuel went to the barn to check the horses that didn't need checking. When he returned, Clara's door was closed. A faint light glowing under it. He paused, listening. The sound of movement, soft, steady, reminded him there was another heartbeat in his house. He went to bed, but didn't sleep. In her small room, Clara stood by the window, looking out toward the dark barn. Her hand brushed the scars on her cheek, a reflex she hated. "1 week," she whispered to the glass, "if he sends me back, I'll go west." The wind howled outside. The fire popped. She closed her eyes and tried not to remember the screams, the smoke, the fire that had taken everything from her years ago. Morning would come. It always did. And somewhere between the ashes of their pasts, 2 strangers had begun. Something they didn't yet understand. The sun rose cold and pale over Crawford Ranch, turning the snow to silver. Samuel woke early, the way ranchers do. Habit, not choice. The house felt different now, alive somehow. He heard the faint clatter of pans in the kitchen. The smell of coffee drifted through the hallway. For a moment, it felt like the old days. When Sarah hummed as she cooked, but when he walked into the kitchen, it was Clara standing there, hair pinned neatly, sleeves rolled, moving with quiet purpose. "Morning," Samuel said. "Breakfast will be ready soon," she replied, not looking up. Her tone was calm, distant, like she was speaking to a customer, not a husband. He sat at the table, unsure whether to speak. The sound of the fire crackling filled the silence between them. "You didn't have to start work so early," he said finally. Clara set a plate in front of him. Eggs, biscuits, bacon crisped just right. "I like early mornings," she said. "Less noise." Samuel nodded, feeling clumsy. "You can make noise here. Nobody to mind it." She glanced at him briefly. "Maybe one day." After breakfast, Samuel went out to the barn. The horses nickered softly when he entered. He worked through the morning, trying not to think about the woman inside his house, but every quiet moment brought her face back. Not just the scars, but her eyes, the strength in them, the way she held herself like she'd been knocked down by life and refused to stay there. By the time he came back, the house was spotless. Curtains washed and hung to dry, floor swept, table polished. Clara moved like a shadow, present, but never demanding space. "You've done a lot," Samuel said. "I like order," she replied simply. "It helps." That evening they ate together again, still quiet, but the air between them had softened. 2 weeks passed that way. Quiet routines, shared work, little conversation. The snow melted into mud and March winds swept through the valley. Samuel noticed things. How Clara touched every object carefully as if everything could break. How she hid her right cheek when strangers were near. How she hummed softly while kneading bread, unaware she was doing it. On a Saturday morning, Samuel hitched the wagon. "We'll go to town," he said. "Need supplies." Clara hesitated. "I'll wear my veil." He almost told her she didn't have to, but something in her eyes stopped him. "All right," he said instead. The road to Bitterroot was rough, frozen ruts shaking the wagon. They didn't speak when the town came into view. A cluster of wooden buildings, the steeple of the small church rising over them. Clara's shoulders tensed. She straightened her spine like someone walking into enemy ground. As they entered the general store, conversations quieted, heads turned. A few people smiled politely. Others didn't bother to hide their curiosity. Mrs. Hartwell, the preacher's wife, was the first to approach. "Mr. Crawford," she said loudly, too brightly. "And this must be your arrangement." Samuel's jaw tightened. "This is Mrs. Clara Bennett," he said firmly. "Of course," Mrs. Hartwell said, eyes flicking to Clara's veil. "Well, bless you both. Such a charitable act, Mr. Crawford, taking in the unfortunate." Clara's snorts, hand clenched around her basket. "We need flour," she said quietly. Mrs. Hartwell smiled wide. "Of course, God bless you." As they moved through the aisles, Clara kept her head down. The whispers followed, soft, cutting things that sliced deep. Anyway, Samuel felt heat rise in his chest. When they stepped outside, Marcus Dalton was leaning against the post, grinning. He owned the Triple D Ranch, the biggest spread in the county, and he carried his arrogance like a badge. "Well, he drawled. Crawford finally bought himself a wife. Didn't know they offered discounts for damaged goods." Samuel froze. Dalton's smirk widened. Clara lifted her head slowly. "Mr. Dalton," she said evenly. "I've heard worse from better men." Dalton laughed. Sharp tongue for a charity case. Before Samuel could speak, Clara picked up a sack of flour herself and carried it to the wagon. Her back was straight, her steps steady. Samuel loaded the rest in silence. Dalton's laughter echoed after them. On the road home, the silence between them felt heavy. Samuel's hands gripped the reins so tight his knuckles turned white. Clara stared at the horizon. "You don't owe me defense, Mr. Crawford," she said finally. "Maybe I owe myself one," he answered, his voice low. She looked at him, then really looked, her eyes softened, just a little. That night, Samuel sat at the kitchen table long after Clara went to bed. The marriage license still sat on the mantel, and signed, waiting. He stared at it, thinking about Dalton's words, Mrs. Hartwell's false pity, the way Clara had faced them both without flinching. He thought about Sarah, about what she'd tell him if she could be better than your fear. He stood, took the pen, and signed his name. The next morning, Clara found the license waiting on the table, his signature already dry. She looked at him, eyes uncertain. "Why now?" Samuel's voice was quiet. "Because I keep my promises." Her hand trembled as she signed beside his name, Clara Bennett Crawford. The contract was sealed. But what neither of them knew was that a paper promise was just the beginning. Weeks passed and slowly something began to grow between them. Not love, not yet, but something gentler. Respect perhaps. Understanding. The house began to change under Clara's care. Curtains mended, floors polished, the smell of baking bread filling the air. One morning, Samuel came in from the barn and found his old winter coat laid neatly on the table, mended, every tear stitched clean and strong. "My mother used to stitch like this," he said, running his hand over the seam. Clara smiled faintly. "Mine, too." It was a small thing, but it mattered. Then, in late March, the blizzard came. Snow fell thick and fast, trapping them inside for 3 days. At first, they stayed polite, speaking only of chores and firewood. By the second day, the ice began to thaw between them. Samuel taught her to play checkers. She was terrible. He laughed. Really laughed for the first time in years. "You're letting me win," she said. "I'm trying," he said. "You're just that bad." She threw a checker at him. He caught it, grinning. By the third day, she was reading aloud from Sarah's old books, poems about hope and loss. Her voice was soft, uncertain at first, then steady. Samuel sat across from her, half listening, half watching. That night she fell asleep in the chair by the fire, the book open in her lap. Samuel stood over her, heart pounding, the scars softened in the firelight. He shouldn't touch her, but he lifted her gently, carried her to her room, laid her down on the narrow bed. She murmured his name in her sleep. He stood in the doorway, hands trembling. He didn't understand what was happening, only that it terrified him. Outside, the snow kept falling. Inside, something else began to melt. Spring came late that year. The snow melted slow, giving way to mud, then green. The Crawford ranch breathed again. The fences stood strong. The garden tilled, and the house no longer echoed with emptiness. Samuel had stopped counting the days since Clara arrived.